10 R&B groups. One thing in common, every single one of them became more successful after they lost the voice everyone first knew.
And I will love you so.
New singer, bigger legacy, and in some of these cases, Grammys, number one, songs that are still playing at weddings right now. Some of these stories start with a firing. Some start with a funeral. But all 10 of them end the same way. Let's count it down. Number 10, the Bar-Kays. Before we get into this one, I need you to hear something. The 10th of December, 1967. A small twin-engine plane takes off from Cleveland, headed to Madison, Wisconsin. On board, Otis Redding, his road manager, and most of his backing band, 6 teenagers from Memphis who had just played the Monterey Pop Festival 5 months earlier and were on the edge of becoming stars in their own right. The plane goes down into Lake Monona. There is one survivor, just one, a 20-year-old trumpeter named Ben Cauley, who had been holding his seat cushion in his sleep and clung to it in the freezing water until rescuers arrived. The group was the Bar-Kays. They'd formed at Booker T. Washington High School in Memphis in 1966. James Alexander on bass, Ben Cauley on trumpet, and 4 other boys, Jimmy King, Ronnie Caldwell, Phelan Jones, Carl Cunningham. Soul music was practically in the air they breathed. They were a Stax Records house band before most of them could vote. That year, they released Soul Finger, a jubilant instrumental that hit number 3 on the R&B chart and number 17 pop. Then Otis Redding heard them and hired them as his touring band.
Check now.
They played Monterey alongside Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and The Who. The world was theirs. And then the plane went down. James Alexander had flown commercial that day. There wasn't enough room on Redding's plane, so he survived too. And here's what got me when I first learned this story. These 2 young men, 20 years old, barely adults, chose to rebuild. Not rename the group, not quit, rebuild. They recruited new musicians, Harvey Henderson, Michael Tolles, Ronnie Gordon, Willie Hall. And when they needed a voice, because the original Bar-Kays had been an instrumental group, no lead vocalist, they found Larry Dodson, a 24-year-old singer from Memphis who had been with a group called The Temperey. Larry Dodson became the first lead vocalist the Bar-Kays ever had, and here's what that one decision unlocked. With Dodson out front, the Bar-Kays reinvented themselves for the funk era. They toured with Isaac Hayes and anchored his classic Hot Buttered Soul revue. By 1976, they were charting on their own with Shake Your Rump to the Funk. By the early 1980s, Freak Show on the Dance Floor was in heavy rotation, and I mean heavy. The whole group's creative peak, their chart run, their cultural footprint, it all came after the crash. It all came with a singer they never had before. And here's what stays with me about this. James Alexander named his son Phelan after Phelan Jones, the saxophonist who died in that water. The kid who carries the name grew up to become the rapper and producer Jazzy Fa. Sometimes legacy travels in ways you can't predict. Number 9 is next, and this one connects to one of the most famous dance moves in music history. Number 9, Shalamar. Here's the thing about Shalamar that most people don't know, And I mean this, I've talked to people who know every lyric, every album cut, and they still didn't know this. Shalamar started as a completely artificial group. Dick Griffey and Don Cornelius, the Soul Train team, wanted a recording act, so in 1977 they put together session musicians under the name Shalamar and released a Motown medley called Uptown Festival. It became a dance hit. And then they looked at each other and said, okay, now we need an actual group. They pulled two Soul Train dancers, Jody Watley and Jeffrey Daniel, and added a lead vocalist named Gary Mumford. He was replaced quickly by Gerald Brown, who stepped into the lead role for the group's second album and gave them some traction, including the R&B hit Take That to the Bank in 1978. But Gerald Brown had a problem. He wasn't getting paid what he was owed. And when he confronted the label about it and nothing changed, he walked out in 1979, right in the middle of a promotional tour. And this is where the story turns. Jeffrey Daniel had met a singer a few years earlier at a Los Angeles nightclub called Maverick Flat. His name was Howard Hewett. The voice on this man, rich, deep, technically stunning, with the emotional range of a seasoned soul singer. Jeffrey had tried to bring him in when Mumford left. Hewett was contractually tied to another project then. But when Brown walked out, Jeffrey called him again. This time, Hewett said yes. Hewett's very first recording with Shalamar was The Second Time Around. It went to #1 on the R&B chart and #8 pop, a million seller. From there, the classic trio of Hewett, Watley, and Daniel became one of the defining acts of the early 1980s. A Night to Remember, I Can Make You Feel Good, There It Is, Friends, gold albums, platinum albums, huge in the UK, huge in the US. But there's a layered story inside this story that still gets me. And some of y'all may not have heard this part. In 1982, Jeffrey Daniel performed the backslide, the move we later call the moonwalk on BBC's Top of the Pops, during a performance of A Night to Remember. It was the first time UK audiences had ever seen it. A year earlier, in 1980, Jeffrey had been at Michael Jackson's house, teaching him that exact move, one-on-one, just the two of them, Sunday afternoons. Jackson had been watching Jeffrey on Soul Train since 1979. He called Jeffrey and asked him to come show him the dance. Michael Jackson debuted what he called the moonwalk publicly in May 1983 at the Motown 25 special. The world lost its mind. And Jeffrey Daniel, the man who showed him that move, the man who had been doing it for years, was sitting in the audience that night watching it happen. Here's the part that Jeffrey himself didn't find out until 2008. He and Michael Jackson were cousins. They'd been working together for 20 years without knowing. If you're nodding right now, you're not alone. That story hits different every time. #8 is one of the most heartbreaking starts of any group on this list and one of the most triumphant endings. Real talk. Only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's one coffee a month and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 8, The Manhattans.
Because of my obligations.
Jersey City, 1962. 5 young men who all served in the military came home and found each other through music.
I had to meet you here today.
George Smitty Smith on lead, Winfred Blue, Love It on bass, Edward Sonny Bivens, Kenny Kelly, Richard Taylor. They called themselves the Manhattans and spent years grinding on the circuit, R&B hits, regional success, a dedicated following, but never quite that crossover breakthrough.
Ties, and so do you.
What they didn't know was that their biggest moment was still coming, and so was the worst thing that would ever happen to them. In 1970, George Smith fell ill. He'd been the lead since the beginning, the voice the group was built around.
Won't you try?
While he was too sick to perform, they brought in a temporary fill-in, and then they went looking for someone permanent, someone they could ask to carry the sound of a group they'd already poured nearly a decade into. They found Gerald Alston.
Today, for a bit of bad news.
A young singer from Henderson, North Carolina, who'd been leading a group called the New Imperials. When they approached him while Smith was still alive, Alston said no. He wasn't ready. He had his own thing going.
Take my handkerchief.
Then George Smith died of a brain tumor on the 16th of December, 1970. He was 30 years old. They went back to Alston. This time, he said yes. What Alston brought was a smoother, more pop-friendly instrument that expanded what the Manhattans could do.
I'm gonna miss you.
By 1972, they had their first real hit with One Life to Live. By 1973, There's No Me Without You had climbed to number 3 R&B. But the true payoff came in 1976.
I'm gonna miss you. I can't lie.
Blue Lovett, the bass singer, the group's primary songwriter, one of the men who'd been there from the very beginning, woke up at 3 a.m. with a song fully formed in his head. The lyrics, the melody, everything. He jumped out of bed and recorded himself playing it on piano.
Please, don't you cry.
He'd been thinking of it as a country song. He even considered offering it to Glenn Campbell. Instead, it became Kiss and Say Goodbye. And when Gerald Alston's voice wrapped around it, that moment when the spoken intro gives way to the full sound of the song, it became one of the defining ballads of the decade.
Just like this, let's just kiss and say goodbye.
Number 1 pop, number 1 R&B. 2 weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100, 2.5 million copies sold. The second platinum single in history, right behind Johnny Taylor's Disco Lady earlier that year.
Let's just kiss and say goodbye.
The group that couldn't quite crack the mainstream spent 11 years building, and then one voice, one song, and a night Blue Lovett couldn't sleep and everything changed. And if you've ever heard Gerald Alston sing that song in a darkened room next to someone you love, you know exactly what I mean.
I'm gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss you. I can't lie.
By the way, Gerald Alston is the nephew of Shirley Alston Reeves, the lead singer of the Shirelles. 2 generations, 1 family, both changing R&B forever. I didn't know that until I dug in for this video, and I sat with it for a minute. Number 7 is a group you know, but there's a version of them you haven't fully met.
So many things to say.
Number 7, Atlantic Starr.
Love like yours is rare. It must have been
Before we talk about what Atlantic Starr became, we need to talk about what Atlantic Starr was.
it will be
9 members, White Plains, New York. 3 brothers at the center, David, Wayne, and Jonathan Lewis. Sharon Bryant on lead vocals, talented and formidable, the voice that drove the group through their early R&B run in the late 70s and 80s. When Love Calls, Send For Me, Circles. They had a following. They had credibility. But the pop crossover kept not quite happening. By 1984, Sharon Bryant was gone. She left to pursue a solo career. The group was also shedding members financially. 5 of the original 9 had walked out. They were down to the 3 Lewis brothers and a percussionist. And right around this time, Sharon Bryant was being offered a full project of tracks from a production team called Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. She turned them down. Those tracks became the Janet Jackson album Control. I know. When the 4 remaining members of Atlantic Starr needed a new lead singer, they found Barbara Weathers, a 21-year-old singer from Greensboro, North Carolina, who had been singing at a jazz club as a waitress. The Lewis brothers had actually known her and were already developing her for a solo career. Instead, they asked her to join the group. She almost said no. With Weathers in front, Atlantic Starr released Secret Lovers in 1985, their biggest pop hit up to that point, number 3 on the Hot 100. Then Warner Brothers came calling. And in the summer of 1987, a ballad they had written 5 years earlier but never recorded finally got made. Always. Number 1 pop, number 1 R&B, 2 weeks at the top. Atlantic Starr's only Hot 100, number 1, their only platinum album, and to this day, one of the most played wedding songs of the last 4 decades. If that song was playing at your wedding, or if it was playing at someone's wedding you've been to, and you remember exactly how the room felt when it came on, you know what I'm talking about. You don't need me to explain it. That feeling lives in your body somewhere. What gets me about this story isn't just the success, it's the timing. Barbara Weathers left Atlantic Starr to go solo after just 1 album together. That window, the whole Always era, was barely 2 years. 2 years, 1 voice, 1 song that will outlive all of us.
Let's go.
And the version of the group that came before her never touched the pop chart at number 1, not once. Number 6 on this list hits a little different, because this one is personal in a way you might not expect.
They will bring us joy for all.
Number 6, The Main Ingredient.
Guarantee that the one you love is gonna love you.
You know, everybody plays the fool. You've heard it at a cookout. You've heard it in a car with the windows down. You probably know every word of the chorus without realizing you learned them. That song is in the DNA of anyone who grew up around R&B. But here's what you might not know about the group that recorded it.
Listen, baby, they never tell you so in school.
The Main Ingredient started in Harlem in the mid-1960s as a group called The Poets. Donald McPherson was the lead vocalist. He and his friends, Tony Sylvester, Luther Simmons Jr., eventually landed on the name The Main Ingredient, signed to RCA, and were building something real. McPherson had a voice that could hold a room, the kind of voice you remember. In 1970, he got sick, leukemia. While he was too ill to tour, a childhood friend named Cuba Gooding, who'd been singing background for the group, stepped up to cover the live dates.
Everybody play. Everybody.
He traveled with them. He kept things going. And when McPherson died on the 4th of July, 1971, at 28 years old, the remaining members didn't have to look far. They already knew who their new lead was, Cuba Gooding Sr.
Well, before you do anything rash, like wiggling out that...
And the very first song that group recorded with him as lead became Everybody Plays the Fool in 1972. Number 2, R&B. Number 3, pop. Over 1 million copies sold. Here's what I want you to sit with.
Everybody plays a fool sometimes. There's no
Cuba Gooding Sr. hadn't gone out and found a new opportunity. He had been in the background, watching his friend get sick, holding the group together out of loyalty and love. And then that friend was gone, and the only thing left to do was carry the music forward.
reason is swept away. Oh, heaven.
There's something about that kind of commitment that doesn't get talked about enough. Now, before we move on, I have to tell you who Cuba Gooding Sr.'s son is. Cuba Gooding Jr., Oscar winner, Jerry Maguire, Show Me the Money. That's the man's son.
Cloud your mind with emotion.
Oscar-winning actor. His father was the lead singer of the group that gave us one of the most enduring soul classics of the 1970s. Most people don't know that connection, and some of y'all just said, wait, what? Out loud. I heard you. Number 5, The Pointer Sisters. Here is a sentence that I need you to really hear. The woman who started the Pointer Sisters never got to experience their greatest success. Bonnie Pointer was the one who convinced her little sister June to start performing professionally. The two of them built something together from the ground up. Anita joined. Eventually, Ruth joined in 1972, making it a quartet. And together, the four Pointer Sisters spent years building a reputation as one of the most versatile live acts in the country. R&B, funk, country, soul. They won a Grammy in 1975 for Best Country Performance for Fairy Tale, a song Bonnie co-wrote, and became the first black female group to perform at the Grand Ole Opry. By 1977, Bonnie left to pursue a solo career. The three remaining sisters, Ruth, Anita, and June, were at a crossroads. No deal, no momentum. A dry spell that had lasted long enough for people to wonder if they were still a group at all. And then producer Richard Perry heard a Bruce Springsteen song that had never been recorded by its intended artist. Springsteen had written Fire in 1977 specifically for Elvis Presley, his idol, the man who first made him love music. He performed it at concerts. He actually mailed a demo to Graceland. Elvis died in August 1977 before he ever heard it. Perry brought that unreleased Springsteen song to the Pointer Sisters. And in 1979, their recording of Fire hit number 2 on the pop chart. Then came He's So Shy, number 3, 1980. Slow Hand, number 2, 1981. And then 1984, which might have been the greatest single year any group had in that decade. Automatic, Jump for My Love, I'm So Excited, Neutron Dance, 4 top 10 hits in 1 year, multi-platinum, 2 Grammys. The breakout album became one of the defining records of the era. Every single one of those moments came after Bonnie left. And here's the part that makes it complicated in a deeply human way. Bonnie was the one who started this. She's the reason the Pointer Sisters existed at all. Her sister Anita later said, in her own words, the Pointer Sisters would never have happened had it not been for Bonnie. But Bonnie left, and then her sisters became legends. That's not a simple story. That's not a clean story. And I think the reason it still resonates is because we've all been in some version of it, where you poured everything into something, and then it became bigger than you after you were gone. Some of y'all know that feeling. You know it personally. Bonnie Pointer passed away in June 2020. And somewhere in those later years, watching what she helped start become what it became, I think about how complicated that must have been to carry. Number 4 is one of the greatest cases of hidden genius in all of soul music history. Number 4, Harold Melvin and the Blues. I want to add something before we get into the story. If I say Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, what voice comes into your head? What do you hear? Because I bet most hear the same thing, a deep, shattering baritone, anguished and tender at the same time. The kind of voice that sounds like it's been carrying something heavy for years and it's finally setting it down in song. That's Teddy Pendergrass.
We've been together. That should be so easy to do.
Harold Melvin had almost nothing to do with that voice getting there. The Blue Notes were a Philadelphia group going back to 1954. Harold Melvin was the founder, the organizer, the man who kept them together through decade after decade of lineup changes and label changes and near misses. Their lead vocalist through the late 1960s was a man named Atkins. Demon, they were grinding, working the circuit, regional success grinding. In 1970, they were on tour with a group called the Cadillacs. The Cadillacs' drummer was a young man from South Carolina named Theodore. What caught Harold Melvin's attention wasn't just that Teddy could play, it was that Teddy could sing. A voice that didn't seem like it should belong to someone that young. Melvin recruited him for the backing band, and then John Atkins quit. And Melvin, almost like a reflex, said, "Teddy, you're singing lead now." What happened? The entire Philadelphia international story. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff had built a new kind of soul. Lush, orchestral, political.
We all got
when it needed to be, devastating when it needed to be. They signed Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes in 1972, and they had Teddy Pendergrass, and everything unlocked. If you don't know me by now, number 1 R&B, number 3 pop, 1972. The Love Lost, number 1 R&B, 1973. Wake Up Everybody, 1972. Don't Leave Me This Way, one of the defining ballads of the 1973. 5 albums in 4 years, a legacy that still holds up as one of the 1975. Harold Melvin's name was on the marquee, on every album cover, in every...
Woman, you got yours too.
Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. But Harold Melvin wasn't the lead singer. He never was. The voice everyone was buying those records for, the voice that made women scream in concert and men put their heads down in the car, that
No, you won't.
drummer, he'd picked up on the road because something about the kids sounded different. The moment Teddy Pendergrass left in 1976, furious because Harold refused to change the group's name to reflect who people were actually coming to see.
If you don't know me, baby.
The hit stopped. That fast. That completely. And in 1982, Teddy Pendergrass was in a car accident that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He was 31 years old at the height of his solo stardom, and his life changed in a single night. And what he did after that, coming back, recording again, performing again from a wheelchair, that's a story that deserves its own video. But I just want you to know it happened. Because the voice that made Harold Melvin famous was also a voice that had its own battle to fight.
Just get yourself together.
Long after the Blue Notes were in the rear view. Number 3. And if you grew up in the late 1980s, this one is going to hit some nerves. Number 3, New Edition. I need to start with Bobby Brown because you can't tell this story without him. Bobby Brown was not just a member of New Edition. He was, for a certain period of time, the energy of New Edition, the showman, the personality, the one who pushed hardest, performed biggest, and didn't always stay inside the lane the group needed him in. By 1985, the tensions had built to a breaking point. The other members voted him out, and to hear the people who were there tell it, Bobby found out the way you find out things you didn't expect, not face to face, not in a meeting, just he was Ralph Tresvant, the lead singer who'd been carrying the melodic weight of the group since the beginning, was reportedly considering going solo too. The whole future of the group felt uncertain. So Michael Bivins made a phone call to a 20-year-old singer from Washington, D.C. named Johnny Gill, the only non-Boston native in New Edition history, who already had 2 solo albums out and a gospel group background that had been giving him perfect pitch since childhood. Johnny Gill didn't just fill a spot, he changed the temperature of the room. In 1988, New Edition released Heartbreak, produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the same team who just made Control for Janet Jackson. And instead of the bubblegum teen sound the group had been known for, Heartbreak was mature, smooth, and fully adult. If it isn't love, Can You Stand the Rain? Any Heartbreak? Double platinum, New Edition's most commercially successful album to that point in their career. Here's the wait what moment on this one, and it gets me every time. Bobby Brown, the same Bobby Brown who'd just been voted out of the group, was one of the opening acts on the Heartbreak tour in 1988. While opening for the group that had just fired him, he was releasing his solo album Don't Be Cruel, which would go on to sell over 10 million copies.
When that's not possible, tell me, can you?
Both things were happening at the same time. Bobby Brown opening for the group that kicked him out, while both of them were having the biggest moment of their careers. And one more thing, there's a track on Heartbreak called Boys to Men. Johnny Gill sang the lead on it.
You weather a storm. Oh.
A song he initially didn't even want to record, thought it was too juvenile. That song inspired 4 teenagers from Philadelphia to name their group after it. Their name was Boys to Two Men. Michael Bivins later signed and mentored them.
I'm not asking, just
The ripple from one lineup change in 1985 is still being felt today. Number 2 changed R&B permanently, and the way it happened involved some ego, a limousine, and a phone call at 4 a.m. Number 2, The Temptations. June 27, 1968. The Temptations have a concert engagement in Cleveland. David Ruffin doesn't show. Ruffin had been the dominant creative force at the front of the Classic Five: Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, Melvin Franklin, Otis Williams, and Ruffin. His voice on My Girl, on Ain't Too Proud to Beg, on I Wish It Would Rain, that was the voice that had made the Temptations into something transcendent. But the ego had grown as large as the talent. He was arriving to gigs in his own rented limo while the rest of the group shared transportation. He was lobbying for his name above the group name, David Ruffin of the Temptations. The no-show in Cleveland was the last straw. The other 4 members fired him the next day. Now here's the 4 a.m. part. Ruffin knew it was coming. And the night before it happened, he called a friend he'd been watching perform with a Motown group called the Contours. He told him that the Temptations were about to make him an offer. He was essentially alerting his friend to get ready. That friend was Dennis Edwards. Edwards joined the following morning. And what happened next rewrote what the Temptations were, because producer Norman Whitfield had been sitting on a new sound, psychedelic soul, influenced by Sly and the Family Stone, harder and stranger than anything Motown had made before. He'd been waiting for a voice that could carry it. David Ruffin's silken tenor wasn't that voice, but Dennis Edwards' gritty, gospel-hewn baritone. That was it. Their first single together was Cloud 9, top 10. And it won Motown their first Grammy Award in 1969 for Best R&B Vocal Performance by a Group. Then I Can't Get Next to You, number one pop in R&B, 1969. Ball of Confusion, 1970. Papa Was a Rolling Stone, 1972. 3 Grammy Awards. The album version runs nearly 12 minutes. It is one of the most hypnotic, devastating pieces of music this genre has ever produced. The Temptations with Ruffin were enormous. The Temptations with Edwards won 3 Grammys on a single record. And here's what I think about when I hear this story. Dennis Edwards later said he recorded Papa Was a Rolling Stone in a state of grief and fury. His father had just died, and he felt something in the lyrics that was completely personal to him. He was angry at the producer. He was sad, and you can hear it. That recording is not a performance. That's a man putting something real into the room. David Ruffin died in 1991. He never found the solo footing he'd sacrificed the group for. Dennis Edwards died in 2018. He'd spent the intervening decades in and out of the Temptations lineup, still carrying that Grammy-winning voice well into his 70s. Both of them mattered, but the story of what the group became after the change, that's the one that still lives on the radio. And number one, I don't think you'll argue with this one. Number 1, Destiny's Child. February 2000, MTV's Total Request Live. Beyonce Knowles appears on screen and announces to the audience, calmly, directly, that 2 members of Destiny's Child have left the group. LaToya Luckett and Latavia Robertson were not in that conversation. They found out what happened the way everyone else did, by watching the music video for Say My Name and realizing there were 2 people in it they didn't recognize. Their names were Michelle Williams and Farrah Franklin. Latavia later said she was watching the video and just kept saying to herself, "Who are these girls?" She'd been in the group since she was a child. She'd moved into the Knowles house at age 12 to train with Beyonce and Kelly. She'd been in this since the beginning. And the beginning, by the way, was a full decade of lineup changes before they even got to that moment. Destiny's Child had been through multiple incarnations as Girls' Time, through Star Search, through years of development and struggle. The 4-member lineup of Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, LaToya Luckett, and Latavia Robertson was stable and genuinely talented, but the tension between the members and management had finally fractured it. Both LaToya and Latavia had demanded a change in management. That request, reportedly, is what ended their time in the group. Farrah Franklin would stay only 5 months before she too was gone. And then it was 3. Beyonce, Kelly, Michelle Williams. Michelle had been doing backup work for Monica before joining Destiny's Child. She'd been introduced to the group through a choreographer friend and flown to Houston to stay with the Knowles family. She had no idea she was auditioning for anything. What that trio made together is almost too much to list. Say My Name spent 3 consecutive weeks at number 1. The Writings on the Wall sold over 8 million copies in the U.S. alone. Then Survivor in 2001, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard 200, selling 663,000 copies in its first week. Survivor, Bootylicious, Independent Women, a Grammy for Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group, then Destiny Fulfilled, then A Final Bow. The 3 of them reunited on Beyoncé's Renaissance Tour in 2023 in Houston. All 4 original members in one room for the first time in years, including LaToya and Latavia. LaToya posted a photo that just said, "All love." She talked about the healing, the joy, the prayer. And here's what I find most remarkable about this entry. LaToya Luckett, the woman who found out she was fired by watching a music video, went solo, released a debut album in 2006, and watched that album go platinum. She built something on her own after being shown the door. Both stories are real, both stories matter. That's what makes this number 1. It's not just about one group becoming more successful. It's about every person in that story finding a way to survive the fracture.